The bell above the diner door didn't just ring. It sounded a death knell. Tuesday at 11 p.m. was usually dead at the Silver Fork. But tonight, the temperature in the room plummeted. The second Alessandro Moretti crossed the threshold. He was the ghost of Brooklyn, a Mafia boss whose name was only whispered in back rooms. The few patrons present froze, staring at their lukewarm coffees. The line cooks vanished into the pantry. Everyone knew the rule: you do not look at him, and you certainly do not speak to him. Everyone except Emma Gallagher. Wiping her hands on her stained apron, she grabbed a fresh pot of coffee, entirely unaware that the next words out of her mouth would alter the hierarchy of the New York underworld forever. The Silver Fork Diner sat on a forgotten corner of Greenpoint, Brooklyn, a relic of the 1980s that smelled perpetually of bleached linoleum, frying oil, and exhaust fumes. It was the kind of place where insomniacs, off-duty paramedics, and ghosts of the city converged. Emma Gallagher worked the graveyard shift. At 24, she had a pragmatic view of the world, sharpened by the crushing weight of a $60,000 medical debt left behind by her late mother, and a father who had disappeared into the bottom of a bourbon bottle years ago. Emma wasn't easily intimidated. When you spend your nights serving drunk construction workers and dodging the aggressive advances of street-level hustlers, your nervous system adapts. But even she felt the atmospheric shift when the black SUVs pulled up to the curb, their headlights cutting violently through the rain-slicked night. 3 men walked in. The 2 flanking the center figure were imposing, built like brick walls draped in expensive wool coats. Their eyes scanned the diner with predatory efficiency, cataloging every exit, every patron, every potential threat. But it was the man in the middle who sucked the oxygen straight out of the room. Alessandro Moretti. Even Emma, who actively avoided the local neighborhood gossip, knew the face. It was hard not to. The Moretti family had controlled the Brooklyn waterfront, the sanitation contracts, and a labyrinth of illicit gambling rings for 3 generations. Alessandro, known on the street simply as Il Silenzioso, the Silent One, had taken over the family 2 years ago after his father, Donato, was gunned down outside a bakery in Bensonhurst. Alessandro was 32, lethally handsome, with sharp aristocratic features and eyes the color of flint. He didn't carry the boisterous, cigar-chomping bravado of the old mobsters. He moved with the quiet, devastating grace of a striking viper. The diner fell into a suffocating silence. Old man Henderson, a regular who usually complained about the price of pie, slowly lowered his fork and stared intently at his napkin. The 2 college students in the corner booth stopped mid-laugh, their expressions morphing into sheer panic. Behind the counter, Manny, the shift manager, physically ducked beneath the register, pretending to count a non-existent inventory of mints. Alessandro bypassed the booths and walked directly to the counter, taking a seat on a red vinyl stool that groaned under the tension. His 2 shadows, Salvatore Sal Greco and a massive enforcer known only as Dante, stood a few paces back, their arms crossed. Alessandro placed a leather-gloved hand on the Formica counter. He didn't look at a menu. He just stared straight ahead at the stainless steel pie display, his face an unreadable mask of exhaustion and cold authority. Manny was hyperventilating near the fryers. "Emma," he hissed from the kitchen window, his voice trembling. "Don't go out there. Just pretend we're closed." "We're a 24-hour diner, Manny," Emma whispered back, grabbing her green order pad. "And I have rent due on Friday. I'm not hiding from a guy just because he wears a nice suit and has a bad reputation." "You don't understand who that is." But Emma was already walking through the swinging doors. She smoothed down her apron, pushed a stray lock of auburn hair behind her ear, and walked right up to the center of the storm. The silence in the diner was so absolute that the hum of the neon sign outside sounded like a jet engine. She stopped across the counter from Alessandro. Up close, the aura of danger radiating off him was almost tangible. There was a faint scent of rain, expensive cedarwood cologne, and something metallic, like gunpowder or blood. He didn't look at her. His gaze remained fixed on his own reflection in the pie case. "What can I get you?" Emma asked. Her voice was steady, breaking the silence like a dropped glass. Dante and Sal shifted, their eyes snapping to her, bewildered by her casual, almost bored tone. People didn't just walk up to Alessandro Moretti and ask what he wanted with the same inflection they'd use for a hungover frat boy. Alessandro slowly turned his head. His eyes met hers. They were cold, analyzing her in a fraction of a second, the frayed cuffs of her uniform, the exhaustion bracketing her green eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw. He looked entirely unimpressed. He leaned back slightly, his gaze dismissing her, and spoke over his shoulder to his underboss in rapid and fluid Italian. "Questo posto puzza di grasso bruciato e fallimento. Dubito ci sappiano persino cos'è un vero caffè. Digli di portarmi qualcosa di caldo e andiamo cene prima che mi venga un'infezione. This place smells like burnt grease and failure. I doubt they even know what real coffee is. Tell her to bring me something hot, and let's get out of here before I catch an infection." Sal smirked, opening his mouth to translate the order into a rude English command. He never got the chance. Emma didn't miss a beat. She didn't flinch, and she didn't wait for Sal to speak. She looked Alessandro dead in the eye, her expression hardening, and replied in flawless, rapid-fire Sicilian-accented Italian. "Il caffè è fresco, signore. E per quanto riguarda il fallimento, è gratuito per chiunque entri con quell'atteggiamento. Se vuoi un espresso decente, te lo faccio. Se vuoi solo lamentarti, la porta è proprio dietro di te." "The coffee is fresh, sir, and as for the failure, it's free for anyone who walks in with that attitude. If you want a decent espresso, I'll make it. If you just want to complain, the door is right behind you." The effect was instantaneous and explosive. Sal choked on his breath, his hand instinctively dropping towards the inside of his jacket where his holster sat. Dante took a massive step forward, his jaw dropping. From the back, Manny let out a strangled whimper and fully collapsed onto the kitchen tiles. But Alessandro didn't move. For a long, agonizing second, the diner was trapped in amber. His cold, deadpan expression shattered. His dark eyebrows pulled together, and a flicker of genuine, unadulterated shock crossed his features. He stared at the tired, 20-something Irish-looking waitress in a cheap polyester uniform who had just dressed down the head of the Moretti family in the dialect of his grandparents. The silence stretched, pulling taut like a wire about to snap. Emma stood her ground, her heart hammering against her ribs, but she refused to break eye contact. She suddenly realized the magnitude of what she had just done. The adrenaline of being insulted had overridden her survival instincts. Her maternal grandmother, Nonna Rosa, had immigrated from Palermo and helped raise Emma, speaking nothing but Sicilian Italian in the house. Emma had learned it alongside English, mastering the harsh, guttural rhythms and the fiery cadence of the island. Alessandro leaned forward, resting his elbows on the counter. The terrifying, empty look in his eyes was gone, replaced by an intense, burning curiosity. "Di dove sei? Where are you from?" he asked softly, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that sent a shiver down Emma's spine. "Brooklyn," she replied, keeping her chin up. "Ma mia nonna era di Palermo. Mi ha insegnato a non farmi mancare di rispetto dagli uomini in giacca e cravatta. But my grandmother was from Palermo. She taught me not to take disrespect from men in suits." A slow, terrifyingly beautiful smile spread across Alessandro's face. It didn't reach his eyes. Mob bosses didn't smile with their eyes, but it was an acknowledgement, a sign of respect. He tapped his fingers on the counter. "Make the espresso, Palermo. Let's see if your skills match your mouth." He spoke in English this time, his voice coated in a thick, raspy New York accent. Emma nodded tightly, turning her back to him, a move that made Sal visibly twitch with anxiety. She walked over to the ancient La Marzocco espresso machine that the diner owner had bought at an auction, and nobody but Emma knew how to use. She went through the motions with practiced precision, grinding the dark roast, tamping the grounds perfectly, locking the portafilter, and pulling a rich, dark shot topped with a thick layer of golden crema. She walked back and placed the small white cup and saucer in front of him, along with a glass of sparkling water, just as Nonna Rosa would have insisted. Alessandro looked at the cup. He took a sip. Then he took another. He set the cup down gently, his eyes never leaving Emma's face. "Not bad," he murmured. "What's your name?" "Emma." "Emma," he repeated, tasting the syllables as if they were foreign to him. "You shouldn't be working in a place like this, Emma. It's beneath you." "The bills don't care where the money comes from," she replied flatly, pulling out her order pad. "Anything else? Or are you guys going to stand there and continue scaring off my tipping customers?" Sal actually gasped. "Listen here, you little—" Alessandro raised a single hand. Sal snapped his mouth shut instantly, stepping back as if he'd been physically struck. Alessandro stood up, buttoning his jacket. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver money clip, thick with $100 bills. He peeled off 5 of them and laid them under the espresso saucer. $500 for a $3 coffee. "Keep the change, Palermo," Alessandro said. "I'll be back for the coffee. Make sure you're the one making it." Without another word, he turned and strode out of the diner, his 2 shadows following closely behind. The bells chimed as the door closed. For a full minute after the black SUVs pulled away into the rainy night, nobody moved. Then the collective exhale of the entire diner filled the room. Manny crawled out from the kitchen, pale and sweating profusely. "Are you insane?" Manny shrieked, rushing the counter. "Do you have a death wish? That was Alessandro Moretti. He literally has people put in barrels." Emma looked down at the 5 crisp $100 bills on the counter. Her hands were shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was fading, but she quickly snatched the money and shoved it into her apron pocket. "He was being rude," Emma said, turning to grab a rag to wipe down the counter. "And his Italian was arrogant." Manny grabbed his hair. "You insulted a Mafia don in his own language. He's going to come back and burn this place to the ground, and you with it." But Emma knew he wasn't going to burn the place down. The look in his eyes wasn't anger. It was something far more complicated and far more dangerous. It was fascination, and as she looked out the rain-streaked window into the dark Brooklyn streets, a cold knot formed in her stomach. She had a terrible feeling that Manny was right about one thing. Alessandro Moretti was definitely coming back. For 3 days, the diner was uneventful. Emma tried to convince herself that the encounter was a fluke, a bizarre blip in an otherwise mundane existence. She paid off a chunk of her electricity bill, bought decent groceries, and forced the memory of Alessandro's piercing flint eyes to the back of her mind. But in the underworld, rumors move faster than blood. The story of the Irish waitress who chewed out the boss of the Moretti family in perfect Sicilian had circulated through the underground clubs and illegal card rooms of Brooklyn. It wasn't seen as an insult to Alessandro. Strangely, it was seen as a mark of his untouchable status. Only a man of absolute power could allow a civilian to speak to him that way and walk out alive. Yet, to rival factions, it signaled something else entirely. A deviation from the norm, an anomaly, a potential weakness. On Thursday night, at precisely 11 p.m., the bell chimed. Emma was wiping down the milkshake machine. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The sudden, suffocating silence of the diner told her everything. She turned around. Alessandro was alone this time. No Sal, no Dante. He wore a dark charcoal suit, no tie, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone, revealing a sliver of olive skin. He looked exhausted, the dark circles under his eyes hinting at sleepless nights and high-stakes warfare that Emma couldn't even fathom. He walked to the same stool at the counter and sat down. "Espresso?" Emma asked, her voice betraying none of the internal panic flaring in her chest. "Please," he said. Just that. "Please." She made the coffee in silence, acutely aware of his eyes, tracking her every movement. When she placed it in front of him, he didn't drink right away. You've caused quite a stir in my world, Palermo, Alessandro said softly, tracing the rim of the saucer. People are talking. I serve burgers and coffee, Mr. Moretti, Emma replied, keeping her distance. I don't belong in your world. And yet here you are. Speaking the language of ghosts, he took a sip, closing his eyes briefly. My grandfather used to speak that exact dialect. He was from a small village outside Palermo. He died when I was young, but I remember the cadence. He opened his eyes, pinning her with a gaze that stripped away her defenses. Why are you working the night shift in a grease pit? Because I have bills, Emma said defensively. Why are you drinking coffee in a grease pit when you could buy a Starbucks franchise? A genuine, albeit brief, chuckle escaped him. It was a rich, dark sound. I like honesty. In my line of work, everyone tells me what I want to hear. They smile, they bow, and then they plot to slit my throat. But you just want to make rent and tell me to go to hell. I didn't tell you to go to hell. I told you the door was behind you. Same thing, he mused. He leaned in closer, the scent of cedarwood washing over her. I looked into you, Emma Gallagher. Emma's blood ran cold. She gripped the rag in her hands tightly. You had no right to do that. I have the right to do whatever I want, he stated, not with malice, but as an undeniable fact of his existence. 24. Mother passed away from cancer 3 years ago. Father is Richard Gallagher, a ghost who surfaces every 6 months to drain your bank account and feed his sports betting addiction. You owe a lot of money to the hospital. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. And your father owes a lot of money to some very bad people. Emma felt the air leave her lungs. She knew her father was a mess, but she had managed to keep her life strictly compartmentalized from his disasters. Who does he owe? She whispered, the tough facade cracking for the first time. Domenico Costa, Alessandro said, the name leaving a sour taste in the air. Domenico Costa was the head of the Calabrese faction, a violent, unpredictable syndicate encroaching on Moretti territory. They were animals, known for extortion and brutality, that even the traditional mob found distasteful. How much? Emma asked, her voice trembling. 40,000. Emma closed her eyes. It was a death sentence. She couldn't pay that. Her father certainly couldn't. Why are you telling me this? She asked, opening her eyes to look at the Mafia boss sitting across from her. Why do you care? I don't care about your father, Alessandro said coldly. He's a degenerate. But Costa's men know about you. They know your father can't pay. In their world, a daughter is an asset, a bargaining chip. They will come for you to settle the debt. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. She looked frantically toward the diner windows, suddenly feeling exposed, like prey in an open field. You need protection, Palermo, Alessandro said softly, his voice cutting through her rising panic. From you? She shot back, a defense mechanism kicking in. You're just the other side of the same bloody coin. Alessandro's jaw tightened. I am not Domenico Costa. I do not traffic in innocent women. I run a business that kills people, a business that maintains order, he corrected smoothly. If Costa takes you, there is no order. There is only violence. He reached into his jacket. Emma flinched, but he only pulled out a sleek, black business card and slid it across the counter. There was no name, no company logo, just a single phone number printed in gold foil. If you see anyone hanging around the diner who doesn't belong, if a car follows you home, you call that number, day or night. I don't want to owe you, Mr. Moretti, Emma said, staring at the card as if it were a bomb. I know how your world works. A favor from a don is never free. Alessandro stood up. He didn't leave money this time. He just looked down at her, the mask of the ruthless Mafia boss slipping back into place, cold and impenetrable. You don't owe me anything, Emma. I'm just making sure my favorite espresso maker stays alive. He turned and walked out. Emma watched him go, her heart pounding. She looked out the window as he stepped onto the sidewalk, and that was when she saw it. Parked across the street, half hidden in the shadows of a broken street lamp, was a dark grey Lincoln town car. The engine was off, but the faint glow of a cigarette ember illuminated the driver's face. He was watching the diner, watching her. Alessandro saw the car, too. He stopped on the sidewalk, the rain starting to drizzle around him. He didn't pull a weapon. He didn't yell. He simply turned his body fully toward the Lincoln and stared. He stood there like a statue of death itself, completely unfazed by the potential danger. For 10 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then the Lincoln's engine roared to life. The headlights flicked on, blindingly bright, before the car hastily pulled away from the curb, speeding off into the Brooklyn night, fleeing the silent wrath of Alessandro Moretti. Alessandro turned back towards the diner, met Emma's terrified gaze through the glass, gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, and walked away into the shadows. Emma looked down at the black and gold card on the counter. Her simple, struggling life was officially over. She had just become a pawn on a chessboard played by monsters, and her only shield was the most dangerous king in the city. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she picked up the card and slipped it into her pocket. The radiator in Emma's Greenpoint apartment hissed, a metallic, rhythmic sound that usually lulled her to sleep. But on Friday afternoon, 3 days after the Lincoln town car had idled outside the Silver Fork, the noise grated on her frayed nerves. She hadn't seen her father, Richard, in over a month, but his shadow felt heavier than ever. She was standing at her tiny kitchenette, boiling water for cheap ramen, when the heavy, repetitive thumping echoed through her living room. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the sound of someone who didn't care if the wood splintered. Emma froze. Her eyes darted to the peephole. The hallway was dim, but she could make out the distorted, broad shoulders of a man she didn't recognize. "Open the door, Emma," a voice called out. It was raspy, thick with a smoker's phlegm, and terrifyingly casual. "We know you're in there. The super let us up. Real nice guy." Panic seized her throat. She backed away from the door, her hands frantically searching her apron pockets for her phone. The door didn't burst open in a cinematic explosion. Instead, there was the sharp, metallic click of a lock being picked, and the deadbolt slid back with a sickening thud. The door swung open, hitting the drywall. 2 men stepped inside. The first was built like a cinder block, wearing a cheap leather jacket and a bored expression. The second man, the one who had spoken, stepped forward, wiping a switchblade on his jeans before folding it away. He was older, with a pock-marked face, and slicked-back hair that smelled strongly of cheap pomade and stale tobacco. "You really should invest in a better deadbolt, sweetheart," the older man said, stepping onto a frayed rug as if he owned the place. "I'm Matteo Vitti. I work for Mr. Domenico Costa." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She backed against the kitchen counter, her hand blindly gripping the handle of a cast-iron skillet. "Get out of my apartment. I don't know you, and I don't know Domenico Costa." Matteo chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He walked over to a small dining table and picked up a framed photograph of Emma and her late mother. He inspected it, tilting his head. "Shame about your mum. But your dad? Richard? Now there's a guy who doesn't know when to walk away from a roulette table. He's into Mr. Costa for 40 large, and since Richard seems to have vanished off the face of the earth, his debt rolls downhill." "I don't have $40,000, Emma said, her voice shaking despite her desperate attempt to keep it steady. "I wait tables. Look around. Do I look like I have that kind of money?" Matteo dropped the framed photo. The glass shattered across the floorboards. Emma flinched, but she didn't lower the skillet. "No, you don't," Matteo agreed, stepping closer, his dark eyes raking over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "But Mr. Costa is a creative businessman. He owns a few establishments, private clubs down in Atlantic City. You work off the debt. You're a pretty girl. It might take you 5, maybe 6 years, but you'll pay it back. Every red cent." The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. This wasn't just a threat of violence, it was a threat of total ownership. They were going to traffic her to cover a gambling debt. "I'm not going anywhere with you," Emma said, her knuckles turning white around the skillet's handle. The cinder block of a man took a step forward, but Matteo held up a hand. "We're not taking you today, Emma. We're reasonable men. We're giving you 48 hours. You find the money, or you pack a bag. If you run, we find your father, and we mail him to you in pieces. If you call the cops, well, you're smart enough to know how that ends." Matteo stepped right into her personal space. She could smell the garlic and decay on his breath. "Sunday night. Have a bag packed." They turned and walked out, leaving the door wide open. Emma stood frozen for a full minute, the silence of the apartment broken only by the hissing radiator. When her legs finally gave out, she slid down the cabinets to the linoleum floor, gasping for air as the terror fully took hold. She was trapped. Her father had finally signed her death warrant. Her trembling hands reached into her jeans pocket. Her fingers brushed against stiff, high-quality cardstock. She pulled out the black business card with the gold foil number. "If Costa takes you, there is no order. There is only violence." Alessandro's words echoed in her mind. She had promised herself she wouldn't call him. Involving the head of the Moretti family was like inviting a shark into a swimming pool to take care of a piranha. But as she stared at the shattered glass of her mother's photograph on the floor, she realized she was out of options. She grabbed her cell phone and dialed. It rang only twice. "Speak!" The voice was a low, resonant baritone, cold, efficient, and unmistakable. "It's Emma," she breathed, fighting the tremor in her voice. "Emma Gallagher, the waitress." There was a fraction of a second of silence, a subtle shifting of gears on the other end of the line. "Are you hurt, Palermo?" Alessandro asked, the coldness instantly replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. "No, but Costa's men were just here. A man named Matteo Vitti." A dark, dangerous sound emanated from the phone, a low growl that made Emma shiver. "Matteo," Alessandro said, his voice dropping an octave. "Did he touch you?" "No. He gave me 48 hours to pay my father's debt, or they're taking me to Atlantic City." She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting back a tear. "I need your help, Mr. Moretti, but I am not begging for charity." "Where are you?" "My apartment. Greenpoint. Lock your door. Do not look out the window. Dante will be there in exactly 12 minutes. He will knock 3 times, pause, and knock twice. Open the door for no one else." The line went dead. Exactly 12 minutes later, the specific sequence of knocks rattled Emma's door. She opened it to find Dante, the massive enforcer from the diner, filling the doorframe. He didn't say a word, simply gesturing for her to follow. A black, armored SUV was idling on the street. Dante opened the back door, and Emma climbed in. The interior smelled of rich leather and sanitized air. For 45 minutes, they drove in complete silence, crossing the Verrazzano Narrows Bridge into Staten Island, winding up the affluent, heavily wooded roads of Tot Hill. They pulled up to massive wrought-iron gates that swung open silently. The driveway led to a sprawling, stone-faced estate that looked more like a fortress than a home. Security cameras tracked their every move, and men in dark suits stood discreetly in the shadows of the manicured hedges. Dante escorted her through the grand mahogany front doors and down a long corridor lined with classic Italian art. He opened a set of double doors to a cavernous study. The room was lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. A fire cracked in a massive marble fireplace. Alessandro Moretti sat behind a heavy oak desk, a crystal glass of amber liquid in his hand. He wore a crisp white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal a network of dark, intricate tattoos snaking up his forearms, a stark contrast to the tailored suits he usually wore. He stood up the moment she walked in. Dante closed the doors behind her, leaving them alone. Alessandro's flint eyes scanned her from head to toe, looking for any sign of physical harm. When he was satisfied she was uninjured, the rigid tension in his shoulders relaxed slightly. "Sit, Emma," he commanded softly, gesturing to a leather wing-back chair across from his desk. She sat, refusing to shrink into the plush leather. "I want to be clear, Mr. Moretti. Alessandro," he corrected, walking around the desk to lean against the front of it, crossing his arms. He was close enough that she could see the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. "Alessandro," she repeated, the name feeling strange on her tongue. "I don't have $40,000, and I refuse to be owned by Domenico Costa. But I also refuse to be a charity case for the Moretti family. If you pay off my father's debt, I need a way to pay you back. On paper, a clean break." Alessandro studied her, a flicker of genuine admiration crossing his features. "You are in the crosshairs of a very brutal man. Yet you sit in my house, negotiating terms like a boss. You are either incredibly brave, Palermo, or entirely reckless." "I'm desperate," she corrected flatly. "There's a difference." Alessandro sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "I already took care of the debt." Emma blinked, stunned. "What? When?" "10 minutes after you called me. I wired $40,000 to Costa's intermediary. The debt is zeroed out. Matteo Vitti will never set foot in your borough again, let alone your apartment." Relief crashed over her so intensely she felt lightheaded. She gripped the arms of the chair to steady herself, but the relief was instantly followed by a chilling realization. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you just drop $40,000 for a waitress you met 3 days ago?" Alessandro looked away, staring into the fireplace for a long moment. When he looked back at her, the mask of the Don was firmly in place, but there was a vulnerability in his eyes that he couldn't quite hide. "Because Costa is a symptom of a larger disease," Alessandro said, his voice low. "He is moving aggressively, breaking the old rules. But more importantly..." He paused, stepping away from the desk and walking to a small safe hidden behind a painting. He punched in a code, opened it, and pulled out a stack of aged, yellowing papers tied with twine. He placed the bundle on the desk in front of her. "What is this?" Emma asked. 3 weeks ago, my men intercepted a courier working for Costa. He was carrying these. They are ledgers and letters written by Costa's uncle, a man deeply embedded in the Sicilian Old Guard. We believe they contain the locations of Costa's off-the-books armories and the identities of politicians he has blackmailed." Emma looked at the papers. "So read them. Use them against him." "We can't," Alessandro said, a hint of frustration edging his voice. "They are written in a highly localized, archaic dialect of Palermitano. It is heavily coded with village slang from the 1950s. My father could have read it. But he is dead. My uncle could have read it, but Costa had him killed 2 months ago to ensure these secrets stayed buried. The translators I hire legitimately cannot decipher the context, and I cannot trust anyone inside my organization not to sell the information back to Costa." Alessandro leaned over her, placing his hands on the arms of her chair, trapping her in his intense gaze. "But you argued with me in perfect, flawless Palermitano. You used slang that hasn't been spoken on these streets in 50 years. You learned it from your grandmother." Emma looked down at the letters, the realization dawning on her. "You want me to translate them? I don't want you to, Emma. I need you to." His voice was a raspy whisper, dangerously close to her ear. "Costa thinks he holds all the cards because he thinks the language of the old country is dead. You are the key to dismantling his operation and before he starts a war that will burn Brooklyn to the ground." Emma stared at the faded ink on the top page. It looked like gibberish to a normal Italian speaker, but to her, the rhythmic, guttural patterns leaped off the page. It was the language of her childhood kitchen. "If I do this," Emma said, looking up to meet his eyes. "My father's debt is clear. We are square." "Square," Alessandro agreed, his gaze locking onto hers. The proximity was electric, a heavy, pulling tension that made the air in the room feel thick. "And I don't do it here," she added quickly. "I have a job. I have a life." "You cannot go back to that apartment, Emma. Costa might be paid off, but if he finds out you are the one decoding his empire, Matteo Vitti will look like a choir boy compared to what Costa will send after you." Alessandro straightened up, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You will stay here, in the guest wing, under my protection. I will pay your diner wages times 10 for your time." Emma looked around the opulent, fortified study. She had traded the frying oil of the silver fork for the velvet cage of the Mafia king. She was terrified, but as she looked at Alessandro, at the fierce, undeniable protection radiating from him, she felt something else, too. A spark she had absolutely no business feeling for a man who ordered executions. She reached out and pulled the stack of letters toward her. "Get me a pen, Mr. Moretti," Emma said. "We have a war to stop." For 2 weeks, the Tot Hill estate became Emma's entire world. The sprawling stone mansion was a paradox. It was a fortress of lethal men and high-tech security, yet inside it felt like a gilded sanctuary. Emma was given a suite in the east wing, complete with a marble soaking tub and a balcony overlooking the Verrazzano Narrows Bridge. But she spent very little time there. Her days and nights were consumed by the heavy oak desk in Alessandro's study. The translation process was grueling. Domenico Costa's uncle hadn't just written in the archaic Palermitano dialect. He had buried his illicit business in layers of familial metaphors and neighborhood slang from a bygone era of Sicily. A basket of blood oranges meant a shipment of stolen firearms. A visit to the baker translated to a payoff to a local precinct captain. But as Emma worked, an undeniable rhythm developed between her and Alessandro. He was no longer just the terrifying ghost of Brooklyn. She saw the man beneath the bespoke suits, the exhaustion that shadowed his flint eyes, the immense, crushing weight of keeping his family alive in a city that wanted to swallow them whole. They spent hours in the quiet solitude of the study. He would review legitimate shipping manifests while she deciphered Costa's violent poetry. The power dynamic subtly shifted. He didn't treat her like a waitress or a hostage. He listened to her. Late one Tuesday night, the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows, Emma rubbed her burning eyes and sighed. She was staring at a particular entry from 4 months prior. The heavy doors clicked open, and Alessandro walked in. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket, and his tie was loosened. In his hands, he carried 2 small porcelain cups. "You look like you're fighting a war in your head, Palermo," he murmured, setting a cup of dark, steaming espresso on the desk in front of her. Emma looked up, surprised. "You made coffee?" A rare, genuine smile touched the corners of his mouth. "I have a highly critical instructor. I had to practice." She took a sip. It was perfect. The rich crema, the bold bite of the roast. "Not bad, Mr. Moretti," she conceded, the tension in her shoulders easing. He leaned against the edge of the desk, looking down at the scattered, yellowing papers. "You've been staring at that same page for an hour. What does it say?" "It's confusing," Emma admitted, pulling the ledger closer. "Costa's uncle writes about an expansion into the Red Hook terminals. But he says the gates were opened by Il Mastino." Alessandro's posture stiffened. The casual warmth evaporated from his demeanor, replaced instantly by the cold, calculating aura of the Don. Il Mastino. The Mastiff. "Yes," Emma continued, tracing the faded ink with her pen. "He says Il Mastino took a payment of 200,000 to look the other way while Costa's men moved product through Warehouse 7. The date is October 14th. Alessandro stared at the wall, his jaw clenching so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. He didn't speak for a long time. The silence in the room grew heavy, suffocating. "Alessandro?" she asked softly. "Who is the Mastiff?" "On October 14th, Alessandro said, his voice terrifyingly quiet, empty of all emotion. "I sent a team to secure Warehouse 7 in Red Hook. I was told Costa's men never showed up. The man in charge of that team..." He paused, closing his eyes for a fraction of a second. Was Salvatore Greco. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. Sal, the sneering underboss from the diner, the man who stood at Alessandro's right hand. "Sal is the traitor," she whispered. "He was my father's most trusted captain," Alessandro said, opening his eyes. The betrayal in them was profound, a dark storm brewing in the flinty depths. "Costa isn't just encroaching on my territory, Emma. He's buying my family out from under me. If Sal is working for him, they know my routes, my numbers, my security protocols." He looked down at Emma, and the realization of what she had just done settled between them. She hadn't just translated a ledger, she had saved his life. If Sal had remained undetected, Alessandro would have eventually been led into a slaughter. Alessandro reached out, his large, warm hand gently cupping her jaw. His thumb brushed against her cheekbone. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to her heart. "You just handed me the key to my kingdom, Emma," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion she hadn't heard from him before. "I owe you a debt I can never repay." "I don't want a debt," she replied, her breath catching in her throat as she looked up into his intense gaze. "I just want this to be over." "It will be," Alessandro promised, dropping his hand and stepping back, the ruthless Mafia boss taking over once again. "Tomorrow night, Costa is expecting a massive shipment at the Red Hook docks. Sal is supposed to be leading my patrol. I'm going to feed Sal false information and let him walk right into his own grave. And when Costa shows up to collect his prize, I will be waiting." The following night, the Tot Hill estate felt like a tomb. Alessandro had left with 3 SUVs full of heavily armed men, leaving only a skeleton crew and the massive enforcer, Dante, to guard the house. Emma sat in the study, unable to focus on the remaining ledgers. Her stomach was tied in agonizing knots. By midnight, a terrible, gnawing feeling began to fester in her chest. She looked down at the ledger she had translated the night before. She flipped the page, staring at the entry immediately following the payoff to Sal. She began to read, her lips moving silently as she translated the Palermitano slang. "The Mastiff barks at the docks, but the true prize sits in the high castle when the king leaves his throne." Emma's blood turned to ice. She stood up so fast her chair tipped backward, crashing onto the hardwood floor. It was a diversion. Costa knew about the ledgers. He knew Alessandro would find out about Sal eventually. The Red Hook shipment was a decoy to draw Alessandro and his main muscle away from Staten Island. Costa was coming here. Emma sprinted out of the study and into the grand hallway. "Dante!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Dante appeared from the kitchen corridor, his hand already reaching for the heavy pistol holstered at his side. "What is it? It's a trap!" Emma gasped, grabbing his arm. "Alessandro is at the docks, but Costa isn't there. He's coming for the estate." Before Dante could process her words, a deafening explosion shattered the night. The front gates of the estate had been blown wide open. The screech of tires tore through the driveway, followed instantly by the staccato popping of automatic gunfire. The skeleton crew outside was being overwhelmed. "Get down!" Dante roared, shoving Emma behind a massive marble pillar just as the front doors were kicked open. Chaos erupted. Men in dark tactical gear flooded the foyer. Dante stepped out from cover, firing with terrifying precision, dropping 2 of Costa's men before a third managed to clip him in the shoulder. Dante grunted, falling back behind the pillar, his blood staining the pristine white marble. "Run, Emma!" Dante yelled over the deafening gunfire. "Take the back stairs!" But there was nowhere to run. A man stepped through the smoke of the foyer. He was older, wearing a tailored charcoal overcoat, with silver hair and eyes as dead as a shark's. Domenico Costa. He held a silenced pistol, his gaze sweeping the wreckage until it landed on Emma, who was crouched near the wounded Dante. "Ah, Costa said smoothly, his voice echoing in the sudden lull in gunfire as his men secured the room. "The little songbird from Brooklyn. Matteo told me you were pretty, but he didn't mention you were so talented with a pen." Emma's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was terrified, but the blood of her resilient, tough-as-nails grandmother surged in her veins. She stood up slowly, stepping slightly in front of Dante. "You're a dead man, Costa," Emma said, her voice remarkably steady. Costa laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "Brave, stupid but brave. Alessandro Moretti is miles away, chasing shadows. By the time he realizes he's been played, I will have burned this house to the ground, and you will be on a boat to international waters." He raised his pistol, aiming it casually at Dante's head. "Kill the giant. Grab the girl." Two of Costa's men stepped forward to grab her. Suddenly, the massive bay windows in the adjacent living room shattered inward in a shower of brilliant glass. A sleek, black tactical vehicle had driven straight through the side of the house. Before the vehicle even came to a full stop, the doors flew open. Alessandro Moretti stepped into the wreckage, looking like the wrath of God. He was covered in rain and soot, holding an assault rifle, his eyes locked entirely on Domenico Costa. He hadn't fallen for the bait completely. A nagging instinct about leaving Emma had forced him to turn back halfway to Red Hook, leaving his men to deal with Sal. "Costa!" Alessandro roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury. Costa whipped around, firing wildly, but Alessandro was faster. He didn't just shoot, he moved with the lethal, calculated precision of a predator, taking down the two men reaching for Emma with two sharp bursts of gunfire. Costa scrambled backward towards the ruined front doors, but Alessandro dropped his rifle and drew his sidearm, firing once. The bullet caught Costa in the kneecap. The older boss collapsed with a shriek of agony, dropping his weapon. The remaining men, seeing their boss fall and the terrifying vengeance in Alessandro's eyes, dropped their weapons and fled out the front doors into the rainy night. The grand foyer fell utterly silent, save for the groans of Domenico Costa on the floor and the hiss of the rain coming through the shattered windows. Alessandro didn't look at Costa. He threw his gun aside and crossed the room in 3 massive strides, dropping to his knees in front of Emma. He grabbed her by the shoulders, his hands shaking, his chest heaving. His flint eyes frantically scanned her face, her arms searching for blood. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice cracking, shedding every ounce of his stoic armor. "Emma, did they touch you?" "I'm okay," she sobbed, the adrenaline finally crashing, leaving her trembling violently. She collapsed forward, burying her face into his chest. Alessandro wrapped his arms around her, pulling her tightly against him. He buried his face in her auburn hair, breathing her in, holding her as if she were the only thing anchoring him to the earth. For the first time in his life, the silent boss of Brooklyn felt true, paralyzing fear, not for his empire, but for the woman in his arms. "I've got you," he whispered fiercely into her ear. "You're safe. I swear on my life you're safe." He held her until her trembling subsided. Then he stood up, pulling her behind him. He looked down at Domenico Costa, who was clutching his bleeding leg on the marble floor. Alessandro's face returned to the cold, impenetrable mask of Il Silenzioso. He looked at Dante, who was leaning against the wall, clutching his shoulder but grinning fiercely. "Dante," Alessandro said coldly, "clean up the trash." Alessandro took Emma's hand, his fingers intertwining securely with hers, and led her away from the carnage, deeper into the estate. 6 months later, the Silver Fork Diner closed its doors for renovations. When it reopened, it wasn't a greasy spoon anymore. It was a beautiful, authentic Sicilian cafe. The linoleum was replaced with imported tile, and the smell of old frying oil was banished by the rich, intoxicating aroma of fresh espresso and baked cannoli. Behind the counter stood Emma, wiping down a brand-new, top-of-the-line La Marzocco espresso machine. She wore a beautiful, tailored dress, a stark contrast to her old polyester uniform. She owned the building now, entirely debt-free, a gift that came with a heavy gold ring on her left hand. The bell above the door chimed. The cafe fell silent, the patrons instinctively lowering their voices. Alessandro walked in, wearing a sharp navy suit, his presence commanding the room without a single word. He bypassed the tables and walked directly to the counter, taking a seat on a stool. He didn't look at a menu. He just looked at his wife, a slow, breathtaking smile spreading across his face, reaching all the way to his flint eyes. "What can I get you?" Emma asked, leaning across the counter. Alessandro leaned in, capturing her lips in a soft, lingering kiss that made the entire room completely irrelevant. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. "Solo tu, Palermo," he whispered softly in her ear. "Only you, Palermo. E forse un espresso." And maybe an espresso. Mao. The story of the waitress and the Mafia boss is a stark reminder of how quickly the trajectory of our lives can change. In a world defined by violence, silence, and rigid power structures, it wasn't a bullet or a betrayal that brought the untouchable Alessandro Moretti to his knees. It was a simple, defiant sentence spoken in the dialect of his ancestors. Emma's courage to stand her ground didn't just save her from her father's reckless debts. It dismantled a corrupt criminal faction and rewrote the legacy of a New York syndicate. By grounding the narrative in the gritty reality of debt and turf wars, we see that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the room isn't a gun, but the audacity to demand respect.
Was geht, Chat? Ich hoffe, euch geht's gut. Ich hoffe, ich bin jetzt live. Ich hoffe, es hat jetzt funktioniert mit dem ganzen Internet. Das wäre auf jeden Fall klasse, wenn ich auch den Chat hier drin sehen könnte gleich. Oh, jetzt Mobil Live Dashboard. Also, ich bin hier in Berlin angekommen. Mal gucken, ob das alles klappt mit den Szenen. Jawohl, ewa. Hat ein bisschen alles länger gedauert. Ich musste mir eben... Ist der Ton so okay, Chat? Ja, ne? Jawohl. Musste eben noch spontan... Also ganz spontan musste ich eben noch mir von Telekom eine neue 28-tägige Vertrag ausbuchen. Hier ist so kalt. Und jetzt hat auch alles dann geklappt. Ewa. Also, wie sieht der Plan für heute aus? Ich bin jetzt hier in Berlin angekommen. Am HBF. Und ich habe einerseits noch Hunger, aber es gibt schon ein Problem. Nämlich heute das Finale ist ja nicht um 20:15 Uhr, sondern schon ein bisschen früher. Also die Aufzeichnung dafür. So, und das habe ich erst jetzt gecheckt vorhin, als ich mit dem Heiko telefoniert habe. Ey, was geht, Chat? Ich hoffe, euch geht's allen gut. Ey, was geht? Wir sind gerade auch angekommen. Sehr gut. Auf jeden Fall würde ich am besten mit euch jetzt als erstes zum Hotel. Dann würde ich mich da fresh machen. Und danach fahren wir zusammen mit 2 Mitarbeitern von Heiko und Roman, fahren wir dann zusammen zu den Studios. Und servus. Und dann geht's los. Mal gucken, wie weit ich dann gleich mit euch reinkomme beim Studio. Aber wahrscheinlich Akkreditierung und dann ist vorbei. Wartet mal. Das würde mich mal interessieren. Warte, zack. Szenen. Die sind beide an. Zack. Chat, zack. Weil ich habe nämlich auch, warte mal, aber warum ist er denn so groß? Das sollte nicht so sein. Wartet mal, Szenen, Chat. Ach, egal. Was habe ich jetzt gemacht? Ich habe den Chat weggemacht. Fuck auf. Passt ja auch so. 43 Zuschauer, gutes Netz, das ist wichtig. Weil das ist immer das Worst Case, wenn hier kein Signal ist. Ich wollte eigentlich einen ganz cool machen, wie ich in der Bahn in meinem Abteil da irgendwie anfahre, hat aber leider nicht funktioniert. Man kennt's ja, ne? Was geht, Gina? Gina Kaufmann, was geht? Ich rauche jetzt als erstes noch schnell eine. Und danach würde ich mal sagen, gehen wir langsam zu einem Taxi. Weil von alleine komme ich ja nicht zum Hotel und jetzt die Bahn zu nehmen, dauert zu lange. Mal gucken, ob das alles so klappt, wie ich es mir vorgenommen habe. Das wäre richtig geil, Chat, wenn ich mich dann gehe ich nämlich schnell im Hotel duschen und dann nehmen wir euch dann mit. Oh, als erstes mal ankommen. Ich bin heute seit 7 erst wach. Aber nur den Stress den ganzen Tag. Chat zu groß, ja. Also eigentlich sollte der kleiner sein. Viel kleiner Chat. Ich muss jetzt mal hier hin, dass ich den Chat noch lesen kann. Aber warte mal, wenn ich das